All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our third Ignatian Advocacy Team webinar, this one on visibility events or public actions. I'm Tim Severin, the Social Mission Director for the chapel, and we're excited to be organizing these resources for our community. Let me introduce now our coordinator for our new Ignatian Advocacy Team, Sarah Damewood.
Hi, hello everyone. So glad you're with us, and again, welcome. This is our third webinar on advocacy skills. Our team began last summer with a goal of increasing parishioner engagement in advocacy, in part by fostering knowledge of and comfort with using advocacy skills. So we encourage you to check out our first webinar on general advocacy, such as lobbying, and our second on writing letters to the editor. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mikhail Townsend. We call her Mickey. Mickey was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. She's a senior at Xavier University, majoring in philosophy, politics, and the public. She minors in criminal justice and peace and justice studies. She's the current president of XU's Student Government Association. She's not only involved heavily on campus, but also within her community. She's a community engaged fellow at XU and serves at Nativity of Our Lord Parish as a volleyball and basketball coach. And she interns at the Archdiocese of Cincinnati as the Catholic Campaign for Human Development intern, as well as at Bellarmine Chapel as one of our social mission interns. So thanks so much for your leadership, Mickey, and I'll let you take over the webinar.
Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and just talk about the logistics for a second. Today's presentation is in webinar form, so you won't be able to speak directly to the panelists. If you'd like to ask a question, you can go to the Q&A function on the bottom of the screen. I will ask some prepared questions for our panelists and then take a few moments at the end to ask the questions through the Q&A section. You can add your questions there anytime during the event. And now to our panelists. First, we have Bekky Baker. She is the program management manager for the Death Penalty and Peace and Nonviolence at the Intercommunity Faith and Justice Center. Bekky was born and raised in Cincinnati, but spent some time in Athens, Ohio, and South Carolina, working on food justice issues and organizing with Save the Children Action Network to advocate for early childhood education funding. Before coming to IJPC, Bekky was a school of social work in Priceville and spent years working with families dealing with the foster care system. She is passionate about building community where the bottom line focuses on people and creating spaces for healing, understanding, and support. Welcome, Bekky. We next have Tala Mohammed Ali. She has lived in Cincinnati most of her life, where she currently works at the Dorothy Day Center for Faith and Justice at Xavier University. It is there that she serves as the Muslim chaplain and assistant director of the Interfaith program, and where she also supports and facilitates service and justice and immersion programs. Taya sits on the governing board of the Islamic Association of Cincinnati at the Clifton Mosque. She has organized and served in justice-based movements for most of her life. Taya has been an active organizer in the movement against the invasion and occupation of Iraq 2003 for the Palestine rights and liberation, as well as for the rights, lives, and liberation of Black and Indigenous people. She has intentionally worked to highlight the panelists between these movements and built for solidarity along the way. Tala sees herself as a daughter of Indigenous resistance, displacement, resilience, and survival. She stands in solidarity with all people struggling with liberation. Welcome, Talia. So we can go ahead and start with some of the prepared questions. For the first couple of questions, I'm gonna alternate between Bekky and Talia, so we can go ahead and get started. My first question is for Bekky. What is a visible event?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. But yeah, and a visibility event is something that either it's a part of your campaign that you can either start off with. It can be, something you kick off the campaign with, or it's maybe a peak you have in the middle to really gather momentum and draw people towards your cause. So for example, we recently had the Cincinnati Interfaith Vigil, which both Bekky and Tala spoke at, to both bring attention to the death penalty abolition movement and to gather people together in support and create a sense of community.
Yeah. Thank you. Talia, do you have a response as well?
I do. Thank you. Just to say that in addition to what Bekky shared, sometimes visibility, and I couldn't say this enough, is the most effective visibility event is one that is associated and is in tandem with a campaign or with strategy. But a lot of times visibility events can also just be people spontaneously taking a stand to make it known that there is a conscience to a resistance to a policy or to like hate, right? So if we hear, unfortunately, of an identity-based aggression or crime in our community, people will come out in solidarity with the community targeted to show support, and that would be a visibility event. But as Bekky said, events in of themselves don't bring about the policy or systemic change. They could ignite the spark. They could be part of a broader movement or strategy. But change comes with strategy, goals, a campaign, and those events help. And I think that that's something that really, really, really needs to be known. So like last summer, for example, people were out in the streets every day in the summer of 2020, tens of thousands, sometimes, and people get frustrated and they say, well, why hasn't anything changed? And those were visibility events, not part of like an organized group or strategy. It was just righteous anger against injustice for the lives of Black people. But without that strategy, you're just on a hamster wheel of going out and expending resources and energy without strategy. So, even if they're spontaneous, that's good. And that mass mobilization in the streets can give leverage to people working for policy change and for tangible change. But it's most effective when it's done in that way. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think you touched base on this a little, but why are these important? Why are these events important?
I can start. I think they're important for a number of reasons. I think one of them is to create a sense of community, because we are all interconnected, and even if you think something that affects someone else doesn't affect you, it does. And it becomes a moment where we're making a decision about what we think our world and our community should look like, can be part of that. And that sense of just grounding and belonging to the person next to you and standing with somebody who is in alignment with your being is pretty powerful. And it just really resonates with groups to be able to do that. And then another factor I think that's important to mention is when you're doing an visibility event, that you want to either draw some people in who might not be on your side yet, who maybe are inactive, like maybe they're on your side and they're inactive, or maybe they're in the middle. And it just really kind of shows like, hey, people care about this, which is then going to get the attention of people who do make those policy decisions, and possibly show, hey, look at all these people who are trying to say this is what they want for their community. Yeah. Tala?
I think you're muted.
Thanks. Is that better? Yeah? Hello? Okay. Well, I mean, just to piggyback off what you said, thank you, Bekky, is that there is power in visibility, right? And the conscience of a community. And sometimes someone who is feeling alone will see this visibility event and feel, you know, empowered or feel acknowledged, feel that, oh, I'm not alone in this world, the interconnectedness, as you said, but also as an organizing tool. So every time I go to a visibility or that I'm involved with a visibility event, I make sure we have clipboards and canvassers just walking around and getting the names, phone numbers of emails. So visibility events, even though we think, just like Bekky said, you're going to have people who come who were on the fence, who might be checking it out, who are not sure. That's a prime time to start canvassing and getting the contacts of people so that we can invite them to, you know, to the movement or the campaign or for lunch or coffee and discuss. So always, always, always use those events as organizing tools and canvas.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing. My next question is, starting with Talia, what are some nuts and bolts of planning a visibility event?
So the first thing is what type, right? Well, first is like, what is the message? What is the message? Have a clear message, a clear demand, a clear purpose, right? It can be as specific as addressing a Senate bill or a specific demand of a campaign and promoting that. Or like we saw last summer, it could be just Black Lives Matter, right? As an example. But not everything also, so once you have to have a clear message, and not everything has to be a march, right? So be as creative as you need to be. So what is the event? What is the most visibility that we can, like, what is going to help us? How do we get this message out? It can be a vigil, it could be a die-in, a mock checkpoint, a banner drop, a walkout, canvassing, banner, like anything, right? So once you have that, and think of, you know, some visibility events are civil disobedience. Is there a risk of arrest or no? You know, and always be fully transparent with those participating. Some people are like, no, this is not what I'm doing. This is way beyond my scope, and that's totally okay, right? But always be fully transparent. And that, you know, that role might not be for everyone. So always also have a specific start time and an end time. If you're going to have a program or whatever the agenda is from the start time to the end time, it really helps to map it out. Will you have speakers, right? If so, give them ample time. If you're going to have speakers, how many people are you planning? Will you need just a bullhorn or a megaphone, or do you need a sound system? Take weather into account, right? If it's going to be 100 degrees, if it's going to be freezing cold, will you need hand warmers? What is the likelihood that people are going to show up if it's thunderstorming, right? So think about all of these factors. Also location, right? And be strategic. So many times people don't know where to go, but think about it. No one is at the courthouse or at City Hall at night or on the weekends. And there are so many times that people symbolically march to City Hall or to the courthouse in the evenings or weekends. But if your goal is visibility, if your goal is being where other people are and trying to engage with others and get your message out, that might not be the best place. And also to be principled and to be prepared, right? So like I mentioned earlier, the weather, the heat, the cold, the rain, the potential for people with physical and mental who need support there. If they're going to be, unfortunately, in the day and age that we're in, right, there might be agitators or physical threat of harm, or, you know, do you need a police liaison? And all of those things can be addressed by reaching out to the Cincinnati Medic Collective and the Cincinnati Marshall Collective. And this is a group of people that came out of organizing in 2020, in the summer of 2020. The Cincinnati Medics are trained EMTs, nurses, doctors, people who have worked as frontline medics in combat areas. And so they are trained and have trainings. And the Cincinnati Marshals, there are regular trainings for security and principal training, and we will be sharing a link in the description portion of this video where you could reach out and send a request for the Marshals and the medics, as well as our email address. And we will also have a link where you can apply to be trained. But once you do that, we will also walk you through all of the logistics to help you plan, because the more you plan, the safer it will be for everyone, and the smoother and more efficient and clear your message will be.
Thank you. Bekky, do you have an answer to that one?
I would just add that, like, as a white person, it's really important to also think, like, should you be the person organizing this event? Should you be the person, like, whose stories are you choosing to tell? Should you be the person who's out front? I just think those are important when you get into the planning, like, who should really be in control of, like, the messaging and story. That's all I would add.
Thank you. So my next question is for Bekky. What is dog birding, and how do you do it effectively?
Yeah, so bird dogging, it's another form of visibility. And a lot of times it's when you approach a politician or a legislator or somebody else in charge of policy, and you try to get them on record with your cause or campaign. It's very easy for politicians to say, I support early childhood education, or I support, anti-racism efforts or things, but they can say those things out loud, but are they going to support it in the policy side of things? And politicians tend to have a lot of visibility events, and a way to make yourself visible there is to kind of come with logo t-shirts that support your campaign, make it very clear if there's a lot of you. And what you would need to do is you would approach the lawmaker, make sure you have a very clear question. You don't want it to be like a gotcha question, just very clear, like, do you support early childhood education? And if they say yes, then you say, awesome, will you please vote yes on this funding bill or this grant, to make sure that it goes. And so then you have it, and make sure you have it in documentation. And that's something that you can come back and say to that person, hey, you said you were going to vote for this. So it's just a different way of kind of making yourself visible, maybe like entering other visibility events, in a way to make sure that you are keeping politicians on their toes, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Talia, do you have anything to add to that? Yeah, great. So my next question is directed for you. In Cincinnati, are there any procedures for getting permits at places like parks, town halls, etc.?
Yeah. So it's really important to gauge whether you even will need a permit. So in most cases, if you stay on the sidewalks, like say we're going to have a rally or a vigil on this corner in front of this establishment, you don't need a permit, like as long as you're not blocking the passageway of people being able to go past you on the sidewalk. You can do it by walking in a circle, like having a marching vigil, or just standing like on the sidewalk, like close to the banks. You don't need a permit to be on sidewalks. And if you are it's definitely something that, if you reach out to Cincinnati Marshalls we can help you assess whether you will in fact need a permit. So technically, yes, you need a permit for places like Washington Park or Fountain Square, because this is private property. It's owned by 3CDC, the entity that should not be named. And there are also Cincinnati Park, the Cincinnati Parks Commission, they also have applications. So we can also share those with you, but it's very easy to just pull up the application by doing a Google search and just putting something in like Washington Park Reserve event. And the application will be the first thing that pops up. It usually involves a down payment of something over about like $200, but in most cases, you can just do a simple search on their calendar of events that's always up on their websites. So, you know, I've been part of events, for example, where we have called for a rally or a vigil at Washington Park or at Fountain Square. But in order to do that, we would go to their website and their calendar and make sure that they don't have a pre-existing like private event, or that they're hosting like salsa on the square or something like that. And usually if it's something that is, you know, very low key, non-disruptive or threatening, which, you know, that's what we're talking about, no one's going to say anything, and nothing like an arrest will ever happen without, you know, without someone first asking you like what's going on. You might have like authorities come and say what's going on. If they really don't want you there, they will ask you to leave and give you warnings. So, you know, City Hall, for example, if you want to speak at a City Hall meeting, a City Council meeting, again, you just go to their website, everything on Cincinnati City Council, there's a calendar, all of their meetings, the City Council meetings, the agenda is going to be there, and there is a link on their website, and it's a simple Google search to speak, right? And when you speak, you're given like 2 minutes. It depends. Some committee meetings and then the full council meetings, one is 2 minutes, one is like 90 seconds or something like that. But you can register ahead of time. And in some cases, you can actually just walk up to City Hall during the meetings. And when you check in to go through like security at the front of City Hall to get into the council building, you can register to speak right there on the spot. And usually the instructions for how soon you need to sign up and deadlines will be on their website. So you can reserve space at the public library. You can reach out to churches. So it, you know, everything just simply takes Google sleuthing and just following instructions. And again, you can reach out to people who have experience like the marshals and find out if to get help assessing and discerning whether you actually do need a permit or not. A lot of times you won't need one.
Yeah, thank you for that. So my last question is also for Talia. Should media be involved? And if so, what are some pointers for giving an impromptu interview to journalists?
Yes, 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 yes. Always, if you can. So there's a lot, like people always say press release. There are two things, right? There is a media advisory and there's a press release. A lot of times what people think is a press release is usually a media advisory. And media advisory is usually just an invitation to let people know, hey media, there is going to be an event at this place at this time. This is our message. And you send that out and you let them know ahead of time. You can send that out like a week before, and then the day of send out another media alert. On the day of, when media shows up is when you have the press release. And the press release is a note to give to the media. It's like a summary and description, your talking points, your demands, why you're there, who you are, what the goals are. And this is what you give. So when they write the story or when they report, they have something to go off of. And also when you have a visibility event, my recommendation is to always have like designated, like appointed media spokespeople, right? It could be one person, it could be 2 or 3 people who know the talking points, who have the message, the messaging down, who know about the campaign. And then also to know that you run, like you are in control of this story. So sometimes media will ask us things like, for example, you know, we're out marching for Black lives and they want to ask you about, well, what about the looting? Stick to the story. You don't have to answer that question just because they asked it, you know, respond. We are here because lives are important. We are here because, you know, so just practice, don't be frazzled, and know that you are always in control of the story. And just as Bekky said earlier, be very mindful of who you put out front and who is speaking for who and who is telling their own story. I've had numerous times people come up to me at events for Indigenous rights and Black lives, and I tell them, like, I don't feel comfortable speaking here, but let me introduce you to my friend who I think would be relevant and who you need to be hearing from, you know? So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So we had a few questions come in from the audience. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask them. We can start with Bekky, and then Talia, if you have anything to add, you can add. So my first question is, what role does a faith presence have in these events?
Well, in general, I think faith communities or faith has a big role in community. Faith leaders are often the moral compass or the moral guide for their congregants or people who follow them. And they when faith leaders speak, they have a lot of power and people will pay attention, I guess, so to speak. Sorry, I couldn't find my words there. And so I think too, when people follow faith, they are in faith, they have certain things that are important to them. And it's when you're in your church or faith community, you're creating that community too. So it's all about how we are relating to others as well.
Talia, do you have anything to add?
Just to say that it's very important, like even this question, when it comes to, you know, I am out, does faith presence have to play in visibility events? I like to say that I am involved in these movements because of my faith and not in spite of it. And so, you know, for me, I can never separate my faith from my commitment to justice. I do it because of my faith. And so when I go out to these visibility events, I bring my whole self. I bring, you know, my spirituality, and I'm visibly, you know, of a religious community. And one prophetic saying that is very important to me is, peace be upon him, prophetic saying is, whoever of you sees an evil, let them change it with their hand. So with action. If we are not able to do so, then let them change it with the tongue. And if we are not able to do that, then let us change it with our heart. And just sitting and changing it with your heart, that's the weakest, you know, of faith that we can do. And so for me to, like, I don't think it's an option not to show up as my whole self. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My next question is, what would you say to someone who's never joined an event, and what would be the best ways for them to get started?
Bring a buddy. I always feel better when I'm kind of branching into something if I bring a pal and a friend. You know, don't be afraid to ask questions. There's always going to be somebody there who's there to interact with the crowd. And if you're interested in an issue, just kind of Google those names of the issue and see what organizations are working on that issue and check out what their events are like and just start from there. Yeah.
And that it's okay to be nervous. It's okay to be scared and unsure. Trust yourself and know, like Bekky said, like I always go with it. Like it always makes it just better and more accessible to go with a friend or a buddy or someone. But you know, if there's something there, like, you know, that I think show up, always err on the side of showing up. And if there is something that doesn't sit well with you, that you don't like seeing or hearing, all you have to do is leave, right? So, you know, never count yourself out or not show up to something because you're unsure. And it's okay to go nervous because we all have to start at somewhere, and we've all at one point started at a zero entry level point. And so this is the beginning of your journey, you know, just do it. And and read and research and Google and find out who else is in your area that's doing this kind of stuff, and get tapped in on social media. And the more that you're seeing this stuff happening around you locally, the more you get plugged into different people, the more comfortable and accessible it will be.
Yeah, thank you. The last question from the audience is, where do you find hope in this work, or what keeps you in the work of justice or for justice?
I would say the reason changes constantly, and there's multitudes of them, but today I would say it's the people. People's stories. I just genuinely have faith in people, and just being able to talk to others and know that others, feel the way I do, and have just the amount of like effort that people put into creating a space that's inclusive and a community that we can thrive in. That's inspiring. So I guess that's what keeps me hopeful.
For me, it's something very similar, and that is the people, the relationships that I've forged with people, where even in these movements, and the people that I have come to know, and sometimes I look at sometimes it's really difficult to forge and live in community the way you want the world to be. So live now as you want the world to be, and to truly take that to heart, and to forge intentional community, to have relationships and friendships with people that you otherwise would have never gotten to know, outside of these issues and these movements and things that we're passionate about. And so even times when I feel like I'm emotionally depleted, I reach out and I have conversation, and I am floored by the outpouring of support that comes from people that I've met through organizing and movements in the community that I have built around me, just because I do show up and go out there. And so just know that if you get involved in these justice movements and these kinds of things, you're amongst friends and kindred spirits and like-hearted people that come from a whole plethora of like backgrounds and walks of life. And it just makes, and that is the way the world ought to be, and it will enrich you. It just sometimes what we're grateful for as we're in these moments is just to always be grateful and to look for, I guess, the silver lining. So even when I'm struggling, it's like, whoa, like look at all these people reaching out, look at these difficult conversations, and just being overwhelmed with gratitude in those moments.
So those were all the questions that I had and that came in from the audience. So I just want to thank you both for spending your lunch with us. I know I've learned a lot about visible events, and I'm ready to move forward with our community and take action. Today's presentation was recorded and will be available on Bellarmine's YouTube page. You can also check out our social mission newsletter each month, where there is a menu of advocacy action. You can take action on all issues, take action on all of the issues areas our parish are active in. So thank you again, and thank you to everyone who joined us.